Hello, 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 and welcome to Series 2 of The Communicators, an interview cast by Parisi. I'm Nick Connor, and this week we're thrilled to have with us Julie Ashmore join us to find out what makes an effective communicator. Julie is a highly experienced business leader, former CEO within NatWest Group, and has held senior roles across fintech and banking. Over a career spanning 4 decades, you wouldn't believe it, she has built and scaled businesses, led high-performance teams, and helped organizations navigate growth and challenges. Alongside her corporate career, Julie is also a professional speaker, coach, trustee, sharing lessons from leadership and experiences of personal challenges, including crossing the Atlantic, skiing in both North and South Pole, and competing in global endurance races. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Nick. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to have you. Now, you spent your career leading teams through uncertainty, whether that's, scaling the fintech ventures or building new businesses inside large institutions. What have you learned about how people respond to pressure, and what separates those who step forward from those who maybe take a step back?
Yeah, I think it's commonly a phrase that's commonly discussed is obviously the fight or flight. There's actually a third stage, which is freeze. And through my career, I've learned I tend to come out fighting. I'll push forward, but that is definitely something that I've gained with experience. Earlier on in my career, it was probably more of a keep my head down, perhaps freezing to a certain extent. Probably not running away, but I certainly didn't have the confidence. And I know we're going to come on to talk about confidence, but I didn't have the confidence to necessarily speak up, stand up, and move forward. And I think we've probably all got a little bit of all three of those attributes: the fight, the flight, or the flee. The fight, the flight, or the freeze within us. And it's just learning which should you actually use, because obviously if there is a great big bear running towards you, there is no point freezing. You're not going to last long, or fighting. You really do need to flee. And I think the same goes in business. Which arguments and which fights should you fight? Where should you turn away and go and find another avenue? And equally, I think the important thing with freezing is when should you actually take some time to reflect before deciding which way to go.
I mean, if you look at your career, you've almost ran to the fights in some ways, because you've taken on challenges. You haven't sort of you probably had options to go and stay in sort of much more corporate, sort of mainstream sort of roles, but you went for the frontier of fintech when it was really growing and booming, instead of maybe staying in sort of the mainstream of corporate banking. Is there a point in your career where you went, well, actually, I like operating in this changing space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And over 40 years, I think there were a number of different points. But I think the one that really stands out for me was I was working on a project for a company called Bibby Financial Services. And we were actually looking at setting up a business in Poland. Just to put it into context, there were no other Western invoice financiers, businesses lending to small businesses in Poland at the time. And I was running the project. The idea was I was going to be an intermediary acting between the UK and Poland. And then through a series of a number of events, it transpired that I was literally faced with a situation where somebody actually needed to go to Poland and live in Poland. So suddenly my role had changed from being an intermediary with maybe monthly or quarterly visits to Poland to suddenly being there full time. And it was quite a funny moment. I remember going home to my husband at the time and saying, oh, I've got an opportunity to go and work in Warsaw. And he said, oh, Warsaw, that's not too bad, is it? Birmingham? I said, no, Warsaw, Poland. And I said, don't worry, I'm only going to be going for 6 months. Well, actually, I ended up staying out there for 2 years. So I commuted from not far from Heathrow to thankfully. So I was quite near the airport, but I used to fly out on a Monday morning, fly back every Thursday. And I did that for 2 years. I think that was the point at which I thought, I'm not sure how many people would have done this, but it was certainly a big turning point in my career. The experience that I got was, incredible. And I think that was the point where I thought, do you know what? Sometimes these curved balls that are thrown at you, they can create great opportunity, as that one did.
And you used the word their experience, and thinking maybe later in your career, how much has experience given you confidence, or maybe is this, I'm trying to look at leadership. You've come in to sort of a new fintech, and you've brought experience of basically setting something up in a foreign country. It's giving you all these skills. But is there a way you can have leadership without experience, or is experience a really important sort of pillar to what makes sort of a confident, sort of respected leader?
Yeah, I think it comes down to confidence and competence, doesn't it, really? And the more experience you've got, generally, the more competence, the more capable you are in actually being able to deliver. Because I see it as, everybody's got like a toolkit, and within that are the tools that you use to overcome challenges or take advantage of opportunities. And the issue is if your confidence is too high, and it's higher than your level of competence, then that's when you're seen, or perhaps you're behaving in quite an arrogant way. So there is a balance. Equally, if you've got the competence, so you're able to deliver, but you don't have the confidence, then unfortunately, that's where imposter syndrome comes in. So thankfully, I've never been accused, not knowingly anyway, of being arrogant. But I do know I have had my doubts over the years. And I think that's, a human response generally to sometimes feel that, am I really as capable? So yes, I might have set up a business in Poland, but I'm now operating in a different sphere or a different country, or I'm working with a whole new team, or I'm trying to get used to a brand new culture within a bank environment or something. So I think the most important thing to do is to reflect and think about this toolkit that we all have. What do you have in your toolkit? And be really honest with yourself. It's not just where do you have the skills, but where do you also have the gaps? And remember, as a leader, and this is the biggest thing I've learned over the years, is like a conductor of an orchestra, you do not have to play all the instruments yourself. So I'm a strategic visionary. I'm quite a creative type. I know that's a skill of mine, but equally, one of the areas that I'm not keen on doing is I'm not highly analytical. So what I make sure is that I've always got a very highly analytical person within my team that can fill that gap. And I think that's what experience brings you. So do you need to have everything? No, absolutely not. But having that awareness, what do you bring? What do your various team members bring? And that's the key to success.
Yeah, that's interesting about bringing different people with different skill sets. When you're making teams, you talked about, I need my analytical person here. Is there any other things you're thinking about when you're, sort of are building teams? And what advice can you give to, sort of our listeners will be, building some amazing sort of tech businesses and putting the team together? What makes a good team, personality and skill sets, and bringing all those, like I think you call them, sort of your toolbox together?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is, diversity is key. Unfortunately, we all still tend to hire in our own image. And just as I've said, I need a very analytical person working alongside me. It would be very easy for me to hire, very similar, like-minded people, because those are the people you tend to get on with best. So I think, having that diversity, within a team is critical, because then I used to always say if you think about a team of 10 people, if you're all fundamentally very similar, you're going to be out heading out in a very long straight line, one behind the other. Whereas if you've all bring something slightly different to the party, there will be some overlap. Then you're walking forwards arm in arm, so you're suddenly 10 wide rather than one wide, 10 behind you, and you can cover so much more ground there. I think the other point I just want to make, Nick, is what's really, really critical, particularly if you're working in a really fast moving environment, is to bring, besides the skills, the experience, the diversity, but is to bring a very clear view of where you are going. Now, I love a BHAG, and those that haven't come across the BHAG, it's a big, hairy, audacious goal. So what's the one big thing that will unite everybody? And I mean everybody, not just the senior leadership team. I mean everybody, from somebody on the ground talking to customers, somebody, whether it's building and developing products, new services, solutions, it could be a risk team, it could be anybody, and everybody needs to believe and understand where we're going. Now, of course, you need to be flexible. But what I would tend to do is say, this is where we're going. Let's all agree this. Let's work together. How we're going to get there, we're going to build and work the plans out together. But I think unless you've got that clear sense of direction together, you're all going to be running around in different directions, and you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess sort of marrying, what you're saying about having that clear vision. But take it back to sort of something you said earlier. It's not just about confidence. It's proving you're good at what you do, and the certain element of that is your history from what people can see on the CV. But maybe the CV is pointless. Day one, walking into a new job. Is there advice you would give someone who is starting a new job in a company about how they can prove themselves, away from maybe looking more short term than looking at the sort of the big term goals? What do they need to do to prove that they're a confidence hire, and and to win the confidence of bosses? It could be everyone has a boss. You might be the CEO, but you still have shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really tricky one. I've seen so many new leaders come in feeling that pressure to perform very, very quickly. So what do? They throw everything out and it's like, right, this is the way I'm going to do it. I have to make an impact. And I think that's a very short-term strategy. It doesn't matter whether it's my, to what extent I'm putting my stamp on it or not. Surely, you need to work with the team, understand, who you've got in the team. Remember I said about, where the skills lie, where the opportunity lies, etc. Don't just throw everything out because it's got somebody else's name on it. So I'd resist that urge first. Secondly, I would set a very clear goal, having spent, no more than a couple of weeks, because I've had people say, well, I need 6 months to settle in. As you've said, stakeholders, bosses, no matter where you're working, you're not going to have 6 months to settle in, 6 months just to get to know everybody, get to know it's just, in a commercial environment, it is unrealistic. So I'd say set yourself no more than about 2 weeks to really find out what you've got on the ground. Then set a clear objective, as I've said, agreed with the team. And then I think the most important thing is work out, where are there some quick wins? So I remember, Nick, when you and I worked together, it was, what are the things that are just stopping us from operating right now? What are the things where we can just unlock these things? If you had a complete a magic wand and you could fix a couple of things, what are the things that the team are saying, if only we could do this, if only we could do that? And it's amazing how many of those quick wins you can find. So finding quick wins and celebrating success. So, right, that's what I'm going to do. Let's work together, get that done. Look, we've achieved it, tick it off. It's going to make you feel good. It's going to make your team feel good. And perhaps answering the question, it's going to make your bosses feel good that this is somebody who's going to get things done. If it's going to take 6 months to deliver the first thing, then they may get a bit itchy feet before then. So that would be my recommendation. Look for quick wins.
Yes, and just to bring the listeners in, Julie, she's still saved in my phone as Julie Boss. So we worked together at a fintech, a couple of years ago, and I always remember, exactly what you're just talking about. I think you brought the team together and you gave us all post-it notes and the Sharpie. I always carry a Sharpie with me these days, and you said, well, what do we need to do to achieve the champagne world, is the phrase you use. What is champagne world? What are the barriers? What can we do to build the champagne world? And then your superhero skill was to prioritize, and I do believe we spent a good afternoon, and it was a fairly large meeting room, and the wall and ceiling was covered with sticky notes, but you managed to pull them together and went, these are our quick wins. So that's fascinating. It's all about having that clear vision of what we can achieve. And the other thing which struck me, what you said, is celebrating success. I think that's a big weakness, coming from a communication agency world now. I think one of the things people always forget, and we should always remind our clients, is not only the work we've done, but the success we have, because it's so easy to go from, we've just achieved X, now let's move on to Y. But actually, sometimes you need to remember the journey you got to. So I was just thinking about, how do how give us some secrets to the inner Julie. How do you work out what are those achievable goals? And how do you hang on to what we've achieved and report it on? Is that something you just learned over the years? Was there a eureka moment where you realized, or have you always had that sort of mind where you're able to go, let's tweak this?
I think the first thing, that's quite a tough question. The first thing, because it probably has been gained over years, as you said, Nick, but I think the first thing to acknowledge is you won't always get it right. So besides celebrating success, you also need to celebrate failure. And remember, success and failure, they're actually on the same road. You just don't know how long the road is. So you are going to go down some blind alleys as well. And I think if you embrace that, then you will come up with a number of options. So again, I remember the work we were doing together. There were some things we'd say, wouldn't it be great if we could do X? And it was on our list, and we saw it as a quick win. Once we started delving into it, we found out there'd be a whole system change needed, and not something that was going to be within our budget or our time constraints for us to be able to do it. So we have to park it. Now, is that a failure? We weren't able to move forward with it, but sometimes going down these blind alleys and saying, right, we've looked at that, we know we can't do it yet, and parking that, I think that's as important. And then not being knocked back and thinking, oh, well, we've looked at that one and we've looked at that one, that's not going to happen. But I suppose it's the how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So also being very clear and thinking of what are the things we can get done in a few days or a few weeks, maximum a month. Those are the quick wins, sort of timescales. And the other thing that I love working using OKRs, so objectives and key results. I think that's a really good framework as well, because again, you set the huge objectives, or the BHAG, but then you break it down into quarterly key results. And then you break it down into the tasks that you're going to need to do to deliver. So that's the key thing, is breaking this huge challenge down, this huge project down into meaningful chunks. And I think that's the skill. And I was very lucky. How did I learn that? I was very lucky. I got to work with a firm of consultants called Proudfoot. They're a US firm, and they taught me the art of brown paper mapping, taking the big challenge, looking at a process, breaking it down into every single little steps. And then that allows you to pull out where the things are not quite flowing properly. And that's how you can then identify the quick wins.
And well, let me set the question, and I can paint around it. What's the role of leadership during this? And let me paint around it to give to help your answer, maybe. One thing I noticed is, we talked about, you brought us in this room, put all these post-it notes, make champagne world. You talk about OKRs and, having that goal and what the team's going to do. It's what I noticed, and the thing I learned from you about leadership is it's not about dictating. Because at no point did you tell us that this was our goal. Yeah, at no point saying this is what we need to do. It was to bring the team in. The team did it. And almost your then role was to champion it in the C-suite, champion it to the board, bring it all together, maybe choose which bits we prioritize, work with us to set those goals. So, taking it back to leadership, what's the role of leadership when you are working with teams and running teams to achieve business change, or a company which is a disruptor in a mature market like finance?
Yeah, I think the role of leadership and the role of the leader is almost the least important one. I always say that the leader, it's an inverted pyramid. The leader is at the bottom, supporting and underpinning the team. And especially when, and the reason I think thing that really brings this out is when you go into a new environment, you're probably the person that understands the customers the least, the market the least, because, you're new, you're in, and so I think going into it and recognizing that and saying, right, I as a leader, my role is to unlock the capability within the team. And also, I suppose, if I have a team, whether it's 5 people, 10, 80 people, also identifying if we've got gaps as well. And, gluing it together, allowing it to shape, making sure that every voice is heard, people feel confident in speaking up, because that's another really important thing is, you could have somebody who actually has some of the best ideas that doesn't have the confidence to come along and join in. And then we as a team are not as strong because we need to hear from that person, and I've seen it so many times where people have come out with amazing things. And these are people that, in the normal day-to-day hustle and bustle would not speak up, but bring them into this environment, and really create that atmosphere and that culture where, every voice is important. There are no wrong answers. There are no silly questions or, suggestions. Then I think that's what brings it together. But yeah, the leaders, the least important. They just bring everything together and ultimately steer and guide, challenge, of course, both within the team, upwards, as you say, represent the team at C-suite, etc.
Thanks so much, Julie. Before we dive in a bit deeper into our conversation, I just want to let our readers, our listeners know a bit more about Precy. Precy are specialists in communications, helping organizations achieve their commercial objectives, whether that's raising their profile, boosting revenue, or attracting new clients and investors. We combine traditional PR and public affairs engagements with marketing and content-led strategies, focusing on delivering the outcomes our clients need, not just ticking the boxes. Now, Julie, alongside your career as a leader, you've taken some amazing physical challenges. As we mentioned before, you crossed open, skied to North and South Pole. What did those experiences teach you about resilience and the mindset, particularly when facing moments that you must have felt, really overwhelmed?
Yeah, there's been a few. I think the one really springs to mind, and this was the strongest moment where I ever felt after this particular event, what on earth am I doing? Why am I here? And I was actually on our first day of our expedition skiing to the North Pole. Now, just in case, I'm sure people are aware, but the North Pole is actually on sea ice, whereas the South Pole is on a landmass. So, very different environments, very different climates. And anyway, we'd been dropped off by a helicopter, and the idea is you're dropped off on the sea ice and then you're skiing towards the pole. And we'd started skiing, and we'd been skiing for about, probably 8-10 hours. And the weather was just getting increasingly, worse and worse. And I started to get a numb foot, and I was thinking, oh dear, this isn't good. Day one, if I'm not careful, I'm going to get frostbite. So I spoke to the expedition leader and said, I've got this cold foot and struggling to get feeling back in it. And the long and the short of it is, it just did not go away. I skied for about another 2 hours. And then finally, I said to the leader, it is literally, I feel like I'm skiing on my ankle now. And he said, right, that's it. We're breaking camp. Now, what actually happened, unbeknown to me, there was somebody in the team. There were 12 of us. I was the only female. There was 2 young Chinese guys in our team. One of them had not spoken up. So unlike me, I'd said I've got an issue. And made the leader aware and was able to manage it with him. Well, he hadn't spoken up, and he was actually suffering from hypothermia. He was too cold. He should have stopped, put an extra layer on, but he didn't. So at the point at which we decided to break for camp, this guy unfortunately collapsed. Now, we had an expedition leader and 2 assistants, and the 3 of them were all very much obviously focused on the casualty. He'd collapsed, completely unconscious, very, very severe hypothermia. So they're trying to resuscitate him. That now leaves the rest of us, the 9 of us, civilians, shall we say. And I'll be honest, all hell broke loose. Absolutely all hell broke loose. Some people, back to this fight, flight, or freeze, some people literally froze. So the wind is howling. They sit on their pulks, which is the sleds that we were pulling with all of our gear. They sit on their pulks, they've pulled their hoods up, and they just cross their arms, and they are just sat there like this. And you're thinking, well, that's not going to help us, is it? Other people were trying to put up the tents. The tents are flying in the wind, and multiple tents being put up at the same time. And I remember just seeing this chaos. People are shouting. The snow's really heavy. Nobody can hear each other because the wind's howling. And I remember thinking, if these tents go, we are all dead. Without a doubt, we are all dead. Now, of course, the expedition leaders are still resuscitating this guy. So there's no guidance coming from them because that is the priority. And I just remember suddenly just going, everybody, just stop. Telling everyone to make sure we put 1 tent up. And we did. We put 1 tent up. I got the guys that were huddled over the pulks to dig the trenches to then put all the snow on to protect, to make hold the tent down. We had to screw the ice hooks into the ice, things like that. So I got everybody busy. And I remember someone coming up to me and saying, Julie, what do you want me to do? And it was that moment I said, what? How can I be the leader? I was the only woman. I was the second eldest in the group. I wasn't one of the expedition leaders. I wasn't even the most experienced. There was a guy who'd already skied to the North Pole. Now, I'd already skied to the South Pole, but very different environment. And I think what I realized is that in that moment, you don't actually know how you are going to respond. When literally your life does flash before you. But what I realized is I actually go quite calm and I turn to action, not in a blind panic. So what I did is I got the team together. I got somebody doing this, somebody doing that. We got the first tent up, got the casualty into the tent. Thankfully, he did survive. And then we got the next tent up, etc., etc. But just seeing how different people were responding to the same environment was fascinating. But then that was that evening where I think the adrenaline and everything came out. And I remember thinking, that was close. That was really close. But I learned a lot about myself and my own resilience. And that actually, when the chips are down, I know I can be relied upon to take instructions. But if, in the absence of instructions, I can actually, take control and lead. And even when I'm not the most experienced person in the room as such, and people listen to me. So I was quite surprised, really. But yeah, that was an interesting situation that arose.
I've got the poem "If" above my laptop. I always just refer to it. And what you just said, this reminds me of the open lines. If you can keep your head when all about you, when everyone about you is losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you could trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allocation for their doubting too. That's that sounds exactly what what you described, which is this poem's all about leadership. Is that something people can learn, and maybe just taken from life or death in the North Pole here to the sort of city of London and being in an office during a crisis? Do you find, because you've sat in business crisis over sort of your 40-year career, you've been in real crisis, is there certain personalities which return to type in face of, as those who listened to our podcast last week with Chris, he talks about the bear being at the cave door, and it goes back to what you were saying right at the beginning about the fight or flight. Is there a natural thing you've seen? And do you think there's ways people can be coached to have different behavior?
I think definitely. I know definitely because I have different behavior. I wasn't born this strong leader, adventurous type. If you'd have said to the 10-year-old me that, I'd be skiing to the South Pole, I'd be leading a business in, within the NatWest Group, now I would not have believed it. I was born with epilepsy. Well, I had childhood epilepsy. Thankfully, I grew out of it, but I was bullied at school. I wasn't the most resilient. The resilience that I had as a child was just about being invisible and just being as invisible as possible. So you can grow, you can learn. I think the most important thing is that you need to be authentic. So remember, I said it's important to reflect and understand where you have tools, and your tools that you have within yourself will not be the same as everybody else. So don't try. I spent a lot of my career trying to mirror and replicate what I saw around me. And I think there's an element of you can learn from others. Of course you can, but you need to be yourself. And remember as well, you don't need everything. You can you should work in partnership with others. So where you have gaps, partner up with other people, and acknowledging those, gaps in your own toolkit is not a weakness. It's a strength in identifying those. Obviously, if it's a knowledge gap, you can do what you need to do to grow and, learn around that area. But if it's something that is as you say, a personality type gap, it's unlikely. I think you can grow and evolve, but you're unlikely to really change. And as you say, when the chips are down, it's, what is your type? So I think there's learned behaviors, but fundamentally, remain true to yourself, and then you will always be an authentic leader. And I think another really important point is, remember, leaders get it wrong, just like everybody else. And don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, I got this wrong. This didn't work out as I expected, or any of us expected. And I think, again, your team will really respect that. And will actually come around and support you. I think too many leaders are fearful of what others think, particularly their own team members. But, saying, I got this wrong, but what are we going to do about it? Let's move forward now and work together as a team is a really strong attribute as a leader.
Now, many people would say, North, South Pole, mid of the Atlantic, running a business, they're all quite terrifying things. But I think many people say probably the most terrifying thing you do is public speaking, Julie. But, take it back to these lessons about having confidence, but not only having confidence, being your authentic self. One thing we've noticed, working in PR and working with some absolutely amazing, both women in leadership positions, but also women in technical, knowledgeable positions. And they may not be leaders of teams, but they have the technical knowledge. But we find getting them to maybe step up to speak on a panel or speak to the media, it almost feels from our perspective that we have to proactively ask, where maybe more of a personality type of a sort of a man in business, where they would probably volunteer first. Is there a lesson here you could give to sort of females in the workplace who actually, it's fine, go up and speak, go and do some media, put yourself forward, don't, don't use the words overthinking there, but you sort of mentioned you in leadership positions, this male or female, you may worry about what other people think. It's a case of maybe not worrying.
Yeah, I used to be terrified. I remember I was 21 working in the bank and they sent me on a presentation skills course, death by PowerPoint, because I just would not speak up at all. And I was really, really scared. And I remember one of the things we had to do is we had to put a presentation together and then deliver it. And we were videoed, which was just terrifying. And there were about 20, 25 of us on the course. And I remember we had to prepare the presentation overnight and then we were delivering it the next day. I was so terrified. I did not sleep a wink. And when it came the next morning and they said, right, they explained what we were going to do. And they said, who wants to go first? I was so terrified that I decided the only thing I could do to stop myself feeling this way was to go first. And so I piped up and went, right, I'll go first. Now, what I didn't realize is everybody was terrified in that room. And so when I stepped forward and said, I'll go first, they all went, oh gosh, she's really confident, isn't she? I wasn't feeling it, but I just wanted to end this feeling of terror. And I went first and I did it. And I thought my voice was shaking. I was sweaty palms. It was awful. Actually, I got the feedback. Not just from seeing myself, but I realized that actually I hide it really well. And my peers were all saying, oh, Julie, you came over so quick. I said, I thought I was terrified, and they were surprised. And I think coming back to your listeners, I'd say the same. Whatever you're feeling on the inside, it's highly unlikely that people are going to see it. And remember, you are the expert in your own field. Only you know what when you talk from experience, it is true to you, and people need to hear your voice. And what I always try to think of as well is that if I inspire one other, perhaps young girl who, may not have the confidence to go and do something, whether it's speaking or this, that, and the other, then, I've done my job well. And I'd encourage others in similar positions, if you've reached that level where you've got these opportunities, please take them, because you'll be encouraging others who've not yet got there. And that I can honestly tell you, the fear of doing it is way bigger than the actually doing it. And you'll get a huge buzz when you've done it and it's gone well. And even if there's a few bits and pieces that don't go quite to plan, remember, you did it. And the next time it will be that little bit easier.
It's International Women's Day on Saturday. Julia, we're recording last week, so let's pretend we're this week. But for our listeners, it is International Women's Day this Saturday. What does, I guess the big question is, what does that mean to you? But I really reflect of seeing the changes of the business world, particularly, in the years you've been involved in sort of business, particularly finance, which has, historically been a very heavily male dominated business. But, over the years, we've seen women lead banks and, and fintech and things like that, and what more needs to be done?
I think when people say, well, why is it so important? Let's deal with that first. The reason it's so important that we have parity, male, female, and it's not obviously just, the gender issue, it's way broader than that, but let's just deal with the gender issue for now. The reason it's so important is, if you take financial services, we develop products for the market. The market is made up almost 50-50 by men and women. And if it's overly dominated by either gender, you are not going to be developing products that are going to meet the needs of all. You are therefore, if we just take from a commercial point of view, it is proven that balanced teams from a gender perspective perform way stronger than those that are heavily one way or the other. They make more profit. And ultimately, so if there's ever an argument, that's, from a commercial perspective, that's the argument. But remember, why is that? And it's because you have that diversity of ideas and thoughts and attitudes, personalities, and your products, how you're facing off into the market in which you're competing, are going to be so much more rounded, so much better structured to meet a wider audience, which is going to allow you to compete. And it's the right thing to do. For me, I started working in the 80s, and it was a bit of a Wild West. It was very highly dominated. I think it was a long time before I even worked for a woman. And then interestingly, the females I did work for, as I did, I remember buying the pinstripe trouser suit. I remember strutting around, and I was almost trying to emulate, the alpha male type, but I'm not. I'm female. And sadly, it was very much seen that the females that did survive or even thrive in those environments, they needed to replicate the alpha males that had done so. And I think that, in fact, I know that has really changed. There's a lot more awareness now and understanding. You don't have to be a very aggressive leader to succeed. In fact, even the army, even the British Army has realised that it's not about aggressive leadership. It's about engaging and working together, bringing the best out. Of course, there has to be a clear leader, but bringing people together. And I think that lends itself really well for some of the skills that are more commonly, not exclusively, but more commonly found, within the female gender. Being the nurturing, and skills, etc. So International Women's Day is really important for all those reasons.
And I don't want to make it too personal, but you have a son and a daughter, both probably entering the sort of the workforce within the next few years. Would your advice to them be, obviously they're different people, and obviously your advice is different for different people, but more broadly, do you think your advice to your daughter would be different to your son?
Absolutely not. Because my son, he has a sister, he has a girlfriend, he has a mother, and I think gender equality, it's not a female issue, it's a human issue. Although I do remember a conversation with my daughter when she was about 9. She's now 21, so this is quite a while ago. And I remember saying to her, Lizzie, don't let anyone ever tell you can't do something because you're a girl. And she said, what do you mean? Now, isn't that amazing? Age 9. Now, sadly, by the time she was probably 16, she learnt what I meant. That needs to change so that the 9-year-old girls, the 9-year-old boys, gender isn't an issue at all. But no, my advice to my daughter and my son are the same. That it's all about creating equal opportunity for all, for the benefit of all, actually. Yeah.
And just to finish off, let's stick with this big thinking advice, to advice to anyone that's, remove, genders or anything else, what are the sort of, what would you say are the pillars for anyone to have a good, sustainable career? So and you could put it, we could frame it in finance or anything, if that's easier.
I think there are 3 key things. The first is about knowing yourself, all about reflecting. Who are you? Which skills were you born with? Do you remember? Where do you have gaps? How can you fill those gaps, either by growing and learning and developing yourself? So focus on your own personal development, or working with others. work on them, remember that toolkit, because that's going to be ultimately what you're going to draw on, not just in your career, but in life. And if you don't use these tools, then they will evaporate. So that's the first thing, is reflect, learn, grow, do a lot of self-reflection, a lot of personal development. That's the first thing. The second is you need to take risks. If you don't take risks, your world, in both a personal sense and a career sense, will just get smaller and smaller and smaller. It won't even stay still. If you don't take risks, or you just say, I'm going to mitigate that risk by just avoiding taking certain action, again, your sphere will just get smaller and smaller. So you need to push outwards. You need to grow. And linked to that taking risks, if you take risks, you are actually going to fail. So you need to be willing to fail. And by accepting failure is on the road to success. So I'm not going to get it right all the time. You actually get smarter by failing, because you're building new neural pathways in your brain. And that even when you fail, those neural pathways remain there, and you can use them in the future. So take a positive attitude towards failure isn't the end of the road. It's, I'm still going to go round through it, and I'm going to find a way to succeed. So I think those are the three most important things.
Thanks so much.
Did I lose you?
No, all good. We got it all. But thank you very much, Julie. I've been Nick Connor, and you've been listening to Communicators, an interview series by Precy. If you have any questions for us or Julie, drop them in the comments. And don't forget to give us a like. Be sure to tune in next time. Thank you.